The owner of an expansive farm estate once envisioned a nearly unimaginable project. She wanted every single building on her family's land moved to an identical arrangement half a kilometer away, preserving each structure's original orientation and position in relation to the others. The question quickly arose: could a team of engineers and house movers possibly meet such an extraordinary demand? If every building weren't kept exactly the way it had always been, if the angles, the alignments, or even the view from one window to the next were changed, then, in the owner's eyes, it wouldn't truly be the same homestead. This notion might sound far-fetched, but it is precisely the challenge that confronted several teams of experts who found themselves orchestrating monumental moves under punishing timelines, facing hazards on roads, coping with perilous storms, and shouldering the responsibility of preserving the integrity of historic buildings for future generations. Historic structures are often uprooted from one location and transplanted to another in order to keep up with the evolving landscape of modern life in the 21st century. One venerable abandoned church, set to be demolished, found new purpose as a theatre in a different town. Another historic railway depot was painstakingly hauled away from its original trackside spot to a quieter place, where it could be converted into a museum at a large historical park. Occasionally, a building, valued for its architecture, history, or sentimental worth, ends up on a piece of land so highly prized that developers clamor to take it over, turning what was once quiet farmland into a bustling commercial zone. Such was the predicament of Rose Heat and her family's farm on the outskirts of St. Louis, Missouri, land her ancestors had occupied for over a century. Passed down through 4 generations, her great-grandparents to grandparents, grandparents to her mother and uncle, and finally to Rose herself, the farm was more than a property. It was an heirloom, a testament to family history and pride. In 1959, however, a new highway dissected the old farmland, transforming the once rural landscape into prime commercial real estate. Over 3 decades, Rose fended off developers who saw promise in the acreage and urged her to sell. Under mounting pressure, an unexpected proposition emerged. The developers would build their shopping mall on the land, but would move Rose's entire homestead, farmhouse, outbuildings, dilapidated barn, even her old toilet, half a kilometer east, reassembling everything in precisely the same arrangement. Although hesitant, Rose ultimately agreed, with one extraordinary condition: every fence post, every barn, every outbuilding, and even each window's orientation to the sun must be replicated in the new spot. She wanted the alignment exact, so the sunlight would fall through the same windows in the same way as before, preserving not just the look but the intangible feel of the place. Meanwhile, in the center of town in Nova Scotia, Canada, another homeowner faced a very different moving scenario. Dr. Catherine Finlayson owned a historic house in a crowded neighborhood in the fishing town of Pictou. She ran her veterinary practice in nearby New Glasgow and was exhausted by her 30-kilometer commute. Yet, she cherished her 100-year-old home, reluctant to part with it, simply because it sat right on a busy street and was surrounded by other houses with little privacy. After trying to sell for over a year with no success, finding no buyer willing to restore or live in such a large, antiquated structure on a cramped lot, she made the bold decision to uproot and relocate the entire home to a rural property 30 kilometers away. She called upon a local house mover, Jason, who was left with a choice of 3 strategies: moving the structure in one piece, dismantling it board by board, and reassembling it, or slicing it into more manageable sections. Because the home's route to the new location was cramped with power lines, poles, and narrow streets, moving the entire house intact was out of the question. Dismantling it piece by piece was also impractical. This could require a year or more of work and cause irreparable harm to fragile materials. The best solution, then, was to dissect the house in 2 horizontal cuts, one near the roofline and another under the first-floor windows, to create 4 segments that could be braced, lifted, and hauled away to the countryside. Rose's farmstead project in St. Louis, led by an experienced mover named John Maticol, came with an entirely different set of hurdles. Not only did his team have to move a 400-ton stone farmhouse with 16 to 18-inch thick masonry walls, but they also had to relocate multiple outbuildings in just 4 weeks, an astonishingly short timeline for such a massive operation. Rose had insisted that everything be put back exactly as it was, down to the angles between each barn, outbuilding, and the main house. To achieve this, surveyors meticulously created a grid on the old site, marking reference points, recording precise positions for every corner, every fence post, and even measuring how sunlight fell across the property. They then replicated this survey grid at the new site half a kilometre away, ensuring every structure would rest in perfect orientation. For outbuildings like an aging barn, a machine shop, a steam shed, a milk house, and even a disused toilet, each had to be carefully braced to keep it from collapsing during the movie. The barn had no built-in floor system to tie it together, so wooden cross braces had to be installed throughout, stabilizing the spindly walls and roof against shifting. The milk house, which had 2 layers of brick, one layer leaning outward and the other curving inward, required an elaborate system of cables and interior bracing to prevent the walls from splitting under their own weight. One by one, these smaller structures were jacked off the ground, placed on dollies with wheels, and inched down a narrow dirt track to the new location. After each building arrived, carpenters and surveyors checked that it matched the grid markers precisely, so that from Rose's vantage point on the farmhouse's porch, the barn would appear exactly where it had always been. Roses and shrubs from the garden, along with hundreds of other plants, also needed to be transplanted. However, not all trees could survive being moved. While fibrous-rooted varieties such as elms and maples could endure replanting using heavy machinery, walnut trees, with their deep taproot, were poor candidates. Because Rose's prized walnut was nearly a century old, the landscaper advised that removing and replanting it would most likely kill it, which left Rose with a difficult decision on what to preserve and what to leave behind. Yet her unwavering desire was that as many elements as possible should be relocated so that her farm would look and feel exactly as it always had. Finally came the biggest challenge of all, lifting the 400-ton stone farmhouse off its original foundation and rolling it half a kilometre away. Typically, a house mover might cut a large rectangular stone structure into smaller pieces, but that risked damaging the interior plaster, roof, wiring and plumbing. The other option, taking it apart stone by stone, was too time-consuming, as proven by a church move in Stockton, England, which took an entire year to deconstruct and reassemble, reversing the walls inside out in the process. John and his team had no such luxury of time, so they chose a high-risk solution. They would hoist the building in one piece. To do so, they drilled carefully through the thick stone walls to insert large steel beams as the main lifting platform. Each beam had to pass through tight openings so as not to weaken the structure more than necessary. With the beams in place, hydraulic jacks would lift the entire house in increments, sliding wooden cribbing underneath each time until the home was high enough, about 1.5 meters, to clear the foundation walls and allow a rolling apparatus of 112 wheels to be installed underneath. Meanwhile, in Nova Scotia, Catherine's house was undergoing radical surgery. Carpenters cut the building horizontally under the windows and vertically through the skeleton of studs, mindful that the slightest miscalculation could threaten the structural integrity. They removed antique banisters and door frames and catalogued them all, marking each piece with a letter and number system to ensure everything could be reassembled correctly. With roofing sections braced by steel channels, they brought in 2 cranes to lift each portion, but mishaps abounded. The first crane's brakes failed, sending it careening downhill toward a railway bridge, only stopping when it lodged itself beneath the bridge to keep from losing control entirely.